Kiddush HaChodesh, and we pick up on the bottom of Chafei Mutbet. It's about 10 lines from the bottom, 5 lines before the lines get wide. So the Mishnah assumes that if the Beis Din sees it, they still need to go for the formal process of testifying, and discusses, breaking off and having some people testify. The Gemara doesn't understand why this is true, because the Gemara will introduce the principle of Lo Teishmiya Gedola Miri'iyah, that hearing it shouldn't be better than seeing it. So why would you need to testify if you saw it yourself? So that's now the issue the Gemara puts its attention to. Let's take a look. V'amai, here you go. Lo Teishmiya Gedola Miri'iyah. Why do you have to have people break off and testify? Hearing it from witnesses should not be better than seeing it yourself. Again, the Mishnah assumes no, you need to go through a formal process, but okay. Rabbi Zera can go in Sharu B'Layla. They saw it at night, and since, as we've been emphasizing before, that you can only do this process in the day, you can only accept the witnesses in the day, and even if you accepted the witnesses in the day, you can only say Mekudesh in the day. So if they saw it at night, their act of seeing does not count like an act of receiving testimony. Now, notice, by the way, your response would be, who cares? They still know. Yeah. So the next morning, I know, I saw it. Why do I need to hear testimony? So the Gemara does not go so far, even in this line of Lo Teishmiya Gedola Miri'iyah, to say that knowing avoids the need of a formal process. All it is suggesting is the act of seeing should count as an equivalent formal process, but it still is an act of seeing that counts instead of an act of hearing testimony. So the same way the hearing of testimony must be in the day, the act of seeing must be in the day. So the Gemara is not being so radical to say, who needs witnesses? You saw it yourself. No. Seeing counts as hearing witnesses. And therefore, if the same way you don't hear witnesses at night, the seeing at night doesn't register. You have to wait till the next morning, and then the next morning you need a formal process. So you have to now accept the witnesses the next morning. Okay? And the idea they saw it at night is, of course, completely understandable, because the new moon is visible at night, not in the day, right? The sun sets and then you see the new moon. So the seeing didn't count. They have to wait till the next morning, and then they have to hear the witnesses. Okay? If 3 people saw, and you can't just have 2 break off because you don't have enough left, then you have to have 2 break off, and you have to replace them with 2 other people to now serve on the Beis Din. Same question. Why do you need a formal testifying? Just the seeing should count as the same process. You'll give me the same answer. They saw it at night. Same story. And therefore, you got to do this the next morning, and therefore you need to accept witnesses. No. So why do you need the second case? It's telling me the same thing as the first case. So it says no. No, there's a new point added in the end. That one person is not, again, this funny phrase, believed, but one person can't serve as a Beis Din. I would have thought, since we teach that you normally judge monetary cases with 3. And if the guy has authority and is an expert and is knowledge, for the masses, whatever mumche means, we'll talk about it when we do Sanhedrin. Anyway, even an individual person can sometimes be a judge. Maybe here also you can do it as an individual judge, Kamash Milan, that you can't. Okay, so that's the Chiddush. The Chiddush in the end is that you can't have one person as a judge. The Ema, not about Shmi and Re'iyah. The Ema Hachanami, Taka, that's a good argument. If one person is a judge, biblically, for Dinei Mamanis, why shouldn't he count as a judge for the new moon? No. No, because nobody is a greater expert and authority over the Jewish people than Moshe. And God says you need to have Aaron with you. Okay, of course, a little bit of a problem is that Aaron and Moshe are brothers, so their puzzle is Dayanim, but okay, as a model that you need a Beis Din, you can't do it by yourself. Okay, and again, an obvious reason would be that here the Beis Din is not just to sit judgment, but to represent the Jewish people, so you need actually at least a larger group than one to be a representative of the entire people. Okay, but the basic point is, why do you need to accept testimony? Because seeing counts as a formal process of accepting testimony, but that can only be in the day, and this was at night. Okay, so the Gemara says, "Aimer de aid nasadayim." Now this Mishnah says that an aid, not somebody who actually testified, could be a judge, because that would mean that you wouldn't need to bring other people. You'd stand in front of the one guy, you'd say, "Here's my testimony," and then you turn around and say, "Okay, good testimony." So that would be one example of aid nasadayim. That's what Kosher calls aid hameid nasadayim. That's an extreme case. We might say that by certain cases of dinei mamonos or whatever. But here, we're not talking about aid hameid, we're talking about aid shira'ah. The fact that I am the judge. You, Charlie, you were part of my base and you went and you testified. I'm listening to your testimony, but I also saw it myself. So maybe that makes me partial. And since I have the ability to be an aide, that disqualifies me from serving as a dayan. So that's the question. Somebody who had the possibility of being an aide now is serving as a dayan. Is that really true? Let's see it's not like Rabbi Akiva. The time we turn on the Brisa. Sanhedrin shero echad sheharagas hanefesh. A Sanhedrin that saw, meaning at least 23, which you need for capital crime, somebody who committed murder. Top of Chavav Amlalef. Miksasa nazu edim, miksasa nazu dayanim. Diva Rabbi Tarfon. Rabbi Tarfon says, fine. Let some of them serve as witnesses, and the others will have other people join them, and they'll be the judges plus other people. So even though you saw, you can still serve as a judge. You didn't testify, somebody else will testify, but you doesn't disqualify you from serving as a judge. Rabbi Akiva Omer, Kula Nasu Eidim, all of them are witnesses, but ain aid nasadayan. If you saw it, you are disqualified from being a judge. So isn't our Mishnah not Rabbi Akiva? So says no. Afilu tema Rabbi Akiva, even Rabbi Akiva. Kan look Rabbi Akiva hasam elabedini nefashos. Rabbi Akiva says you cannot be a judge in a capital crime, because then you are already biased based on what you saw. And by the way, as we know, I don't know if they didn't know this before. In the past they used to think that eyewitness testimony is the most reliable.
Yeah.
Now of course they know that eyewitness testimony is highly unreliable. Right. So anyway, but even if you ignore the unreliability of it, the whole issue that they have about like showing pictures to the jury, and that the sort of like the graphic nature of the pictures will taint them and will lead to so that they won't be able to sort of judge it rationally and clearly, because their emotional reaction to actually witnessing it will have an influence. So that's sort of what's saying, if you saw it yourself, you've got too many things that might be influencing your ability to judge this impartially with a certain sense of a distance. So that's why Rabbi Akiva says if you actually saw it, you cannot serve as a judge. So Ad Kam Lokam Rabbi Akiva Hasamel the Bedini Nefashas. Rachmanam B'Shaftu Eda, they'll judge the congregation V'Yitzilu Ha'eda. They have to try to save the innocent people. You need a certain amount of dispassionate distance. V'Kiva the Chazinahu the Katul Nafsha. And if you saw this guy commit murder, Lo Matzu Chazalei Zechusa, you will be so biased, you won't try to argue in his defense. You won't try to think about extenuating circumstances, and maybe you didn't exactly see it, or maybe you misunderstood something. In your mind, emotionally, what registered is this guy's a murderer, and I saw it. So therefore, you're disqualified. But here, for something like Eidos HaChodesh, Rabbi Akiva would not say that seeing the new moon disqualifies you from hearing witnesses testify to the new moon. Okay, so there are three cases. By Dinei Nefashos, you cannot even, if you look at Tosfos, nice little summary at the end of Tosfos, the Rahmana Amar, Tosfos says the following. He says like this. Ube'ed, it's about 6 lines before Tosfos ends. The line starting with the word Ube'ed. Ube'ed nasadayin yeshinim chalukim. K'moshe parashim perek beis ksuvas. Ube'ed is hachodesh d'oraisa. Eid haroehu d'nasadayim. That in Eidos HaChodesh, if you saw, you can still be a judge. You're not disqualified. Ubekiyum shtaros d'Rabbanan, when it comes to validating the signatures on documents, which is only rabbinic, afilu eid hameid nasadayim. Even you could testify and then turn around and be the judge. Okay, so that's the opposite extreme. Ubedini nefashos, and as we saw in capital crimes, afilu eid haroa ein nasadayan. Even just seeing it disqualifies you. Okay, so in an extreme case, kiyum shtaros, you can testify and then be the dayan. In most cases, in the middle, if you see, you are not disqualified, but you can't play both roles. And in dinei nefashos, the very fact that you saw it disqualifies you. Yes.
You're referring to dinei nefashos as capital cases, but there are cases that are not capital cases where the penalty would be lashes rather than.
So which one would that fall into?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's a good question, right? I mean, Tosfos has extremes, right? What do you do about normal dinei mamonos or whatever? Right. Okay, so we'll leave that as a good question for now.
It's
yes.
interesting that the biblical word that we translate as congregation is really collective group of witness, right? The Ada.
No, I don't want to get. I don't want to get into that. That has to do with the sense that in the psukim, the psukim it has that the witnesses throw the stones and whatever, and there's a sense like the whole community is judging through the court system.
Right.
Yeah, but it's not okay. But it is the congregation. It's just the congregation as all active participants in the judgment through the various.
Right, but it's judicial terminology that is used to describe the congregation of the people. It's
Yes.
an interesting thing.
Yeah. Okay, let's now transition to, finally, the part of this Masechet that deals with Rosh Hashanah, starting with the mitzvah of shofar. Okay, kol ha-shofarot ksherim, all horns are good for a shofar, chutz misha para, except for that of a cow, mipnei shu keren, because it's a keren. What does that mean? We'll unpack that. Amar Rabbi Yossi, says Rabbi Yossi, v'lo kol ha-shofaros nikru keren. You can't say because it's called a keren, because all shofarot are called a keren. How do you know that? You'll see, the verse says, when you draw out, extend the keren, the horn of the yovel, and the yovel is a ram, as we'll see in the Gemara. So therefore, a ram's horn, it's also called a shofar, because, I'm sorry, that's not a pasuk by Har Sinai, that's a pasuk by Yehoshua. But it says, this actually talks about the falling of the walls of Yericho, excuse me. So it says, the end of the pasuk is, B'shamachem es kol ha-shofar. Okay, and then Yaril kol ha'am tura, etc., and the walls will fall. Okay, so anyway, there we're talking about a ram's horn, because as we know from Har Sinai, the yovel is a shofar, and it's called here a keren. So even a ram's horn is called a keren, so why do you make a cow's horn any different? Let's take a look at the Gemara. Shapir, Kama Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi makes a good point. Even the ram's horn is called a keren. For Rabbanan, the rabbis would say back, Kol ha-shofaros iklu keren, kol ha-shofaros, all other horns, iklu shofar, iklu keren, are called both a shofar and a keren. Now, where do you know other horns are called a shofar? The Gemara doesn't say, but Rashi points us to Har Sinai, where it says, Bimshoch hayovel hema ya'alu bahar, right? Not Bimshoch b'keren, Bimshoch hayovel, and then the pasuk says, Vayhi kol hashofar holech v'chazek me'od. So there, the yovel, which we are taking for granted, means a ram's horn, is called a shofar. So other horns are called a shofar and are called a keren. The para keren ikri shofar lo ikri. The cow's horn is only called a keren, not called a shofar. T'chsiv, the verse says, b'chor shoro hadar lo, the karnei re'im karnav. The firstborn of the ox is a glory to him, and the horns of a re'im, which is translated as, what's a re'im?
Here's wild ox.
Wild ox is a re'im. I've often seen other ones, like I don't know, other animals identified for him. Anyway, it's horn. Okay, so anyway, you have horn associated with ox or cow, and you do not have the word shofar associated with it, so because it's never called a shofar, it's invalid. So I'm going to read this a little, and then I'm going to tell you the Ramban's understanding of this, which makes a little bit more sense of this. Rabbi Yossi will say to you, the paranami ikri shofar. What are you talking about? A cow's horn is also called a shofar. T'chsiv, v'teitiv laHashem mishor par. It will be, my offering will be more desirous to God than a ox cow. So, or not cow, an ox bull. Okay, do we use the word ox and bull any differently?
Bull ox.
Yeah, a bull ox. But anyway, do bull or ox refer to? Anyway, in the Gemara, a par refers to a one only after it's like 3 days old, and a shore is even when it's just born. No, that would be para. So I don't know, but I'm saying in English, do the word ox and bull mean something different?
They're two different animals.
They are?
No, they're pretty.
I thought they're both male cows.
They're both
Bovines.
All right, I don't know. Anyway, okay, mishur par. So the Gemara says, imshur lama par. If it's a shur, which is again when it is young, even young, it's called a shur. Why are you calling it a par? Vim par, and if it's from an older cow, bull, lama shur. Why are you calling it a shur? Elamai shur par. What does shur par mean? Shofar. Oh, so shofar. So therefore, you see that an ox's horn is also called a shofar. So I just got to tell you, this like reminded me, shofar. So anyway, Shai's cousin said that once, like 20, 30 years ago, he saw this movie in Israel, which had like subtitles. It was an American movie. So in the English, they were like, they were bringing out like soup and rice for dinner, and it sort of said soup, rice, surprise. So then he said, the subtitles read Marak Orez, Hafta'ah. Anyway, there you go. Okay, anyway, shofar. There you go.
So, Wikipedia says an ox is simply any bovine that is trained to be a work animal.
As opposed to a bull, which is just a male cow, but it's not
right. And in fact,
way.
Most oxen are actually castrated males.
Okay.
Yeah, and a bull is a non-castrated.
Castrated doesn't make it a different species.
No.
Yes, but it's still, I would say, significant.
Yes, okay.
Yeah.
Anyway,
okay.
So now the Gemara says, right. So the Gemara says, Rabbanan. So what would the rabbi say back? And Rav Masna. They'd say back like Rav Masna. Damar Rav Masna, my shorpar, shugado kipar. That it was a 1 day old. Again, this is getting back to things that when things at time of creation were created fully developed. So even when it was a shore, 1 day old, it was as big as a paw. Okay, but now we're basically saying the whole debate is a cow's horn ever called a shofar?
So the Rabbanan don't buy this thing of Rav Yossi of the shore.
Exactly. Okay, so now obviously this is not totally satisfying. In the end, we're having these tiny little debates about do we ever find that a ram's horn, that a cow's horn is called a shofar? Everything is called a keren. It's also called a shofar. Is this called a shofar? So the Gemara tries other answers. So Ula Amar Hainu Taimid Rabbanan. Let me tell you the real reason of the rabbis that says that they don't want a cow's horn. Rav Chizda, like Rav Chizda. Rav Chizda. Nema ein Kohen Gadol nichnas b'vigdei zav lifnai v'lifnim. Why in Yom Kippur does the Kohen Gadol not wear the gold garments, vestments into the Holy of Holies when he does the avodas pnim, lavod avodah to do the service? Lefi she'ein kategor nasa sanegor, because the prosecuting attorney cannot turn around and become the defense attorney. Gold is the prosecuting attorney. It evokes the chet ha'egel, and therefore it cannot be used to in the avodah.
So that's why you don't want the shofar.
Okay. So, and the shofar is also from a cow, so it evokes chet ha'egel. You're not going to use it.
Those are both Greek words.
Now that's a kategor and sanegor.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, yes. Thank you. So now the Gemara is going to obviously point out some of the problems with this argument, both internally and as a parallel to the shofar. Let's take a look. The low, really? You can't have that? You can't have anything related to cows in the avodas pnim? The ha'ika dam par. How about the blood of the ox that's brought in the avodas pnim on Yom Kippur? Someone says, no, hova ishtani. It doesn't look like a cow anymore. Okay, it's blood, so that's not as evocative. The Gemara says, "Va'ika aron v'kapores v'chruv." How about all the other things that are gold inside of the Kodesh Kodashim, the aron and the cover and the cherubs? No, no, but this is we were talking about lifnai v'lifnim, the innermost sanctum. So the Gemara says, the sinner cannot use things that evoke the sin, the gold or whatever, or the shofar. You cannot use the things that are evoking the sin. You're the sinner approaching God. These things are just part of the furniture. You're not using them and bringing them in and approaching God with them. Okay, so the Gemara says va'ika kafu machta, but Aaron brings in the fire pan and the and the pan that carries the incense. Aaron the Kohen Gadol, that's gold. No, the problem is, as a sinner, you cannot use these things to make yourself look nice and to beautify yourself with. Whereas these, they're just vessels. Again, I don't know exactly the difference, but clothing is very different. Again, how that relates to shofar is not clear. But clothing, I would say, a little different than yisna'eh. Clothing identifies you. Like clothing is part of your identity, right? You put it on your body. It becomes integrated into who you are. So therefore, you don't want it that close to be attaching your identity to something that evokes the sin, as opposed to just using the vessels. Now, of course, you'll say the shofar also is a type of a vessel, right? So, Rashi says, okay, but you're somehow glorifying yourself. It makes beautiful music. So somehow it more connects you to it than just using it as an inanimate vessel. Okay, but you're seeing already the weakness of the whole parallel. Okay, so Mer says, "Va'ika bigdei zav mi bachutz." How about what you wear when you do the other avodos and the gold investments that you wear outside of the Kodesh Kodashim? So it says, Mi bifnim kamrinan. Okay, it's only a problem to do it in the innermost sanctum. So Gemara says, shofar nami mi b'chutzu. The shofar isn't in the Kodesh Kodashim. It's in Issa. Gemara says, kivan delizi choronhu kibifnim dami. No, because the shofar, this is like a great Rosh Hashanah sermon.
Yeah.
The shofar, it pierces right through all the heavens, right into God's innermost sanctum. It comes up to raise our memory before God, so it's bringing us in direct encounter with God, and that's like lifnai v'lifnei. Okay, very powerful statement, and therefore it can't be out of a cow. So the Gemara says, "V'hatana mitneishu keren kamar." So the Gemara, how could you say that it's this whole thing about cows and egel? The Mishnah says keren. That's the problem. So the Gemara says chada ve'od kamar. Yeah, that and something else. Chada number one, or no, something else and that. Number one, chada. The first point, the real point is the ein kateger nasa saneger. That you can't use things from that evoke chet ha'ikah. And another thing, which is not my real argument, I'll just throw it in. Mikneshu karen, it's a karen. Yosi will say back. The kamar to ein kateger nasa saneger. Your whole issue about using things that evoke chet ha'ikah. I don't buy your whole argument that shofar is like the Kodesh Kodashim. That's only in the Kodesh Kodashim. I shofar mi b'chutzu. The shofar is outside. And your argument that it's a horn, call a shofar snami karen. Oh, even a ram's horn is called a karen, so that's not an argument. But notice what the Gemara did. It didn't just introduce another argument. It made the other argument primary. Because the Gemara really recognizes the weakness of this whole Karen argument, and therefore, in an astounding way, it's not like it's got a kash and a contradiction. I mean, this is really astounding. Like, the Amoraim are just bothered. Like, what type of argument is this? Karen or whatever. So they invent new arguments, and they try to say that the whole argument of Karen in the Mishnah is a secondary one. So we're not done. This is one thing of Kateger Saneger. Now we're going to give another thing. Let's take a look. Abaye says, and this is the reason of the rabbis. Shofar machmana, shofars. It says a shofar, and it only says shofar, by the way, explicitly by Yovel, not by Yom Kippur, and not 2 or 3 shofar. And we're going to learn later that you can't stick one shofar into another one and blow. So para and the one of the cow, kivan dekai gildi, since it's basically in layers, mitchazi k'shayim v'shalosh shofars. It looks like 2 or 3. So now, hey, guess what, guys? We can make a shechrianu. We can erase the pictures of the moon. Okay, so there's that. So anyway, but apparently a cow's horn looks something like, it looks like there are segments. Each thing that grows new each year. Okay, so that looks like 2 or 3 shofarot, and therefore that's why it's not good. So the Gemara says, "Vatana mitneshu karen kamar," but the Tana says that the problem is because it's called a karen. So the Gemara says, where were we? Chada ve'od kamar. No, that one thing, and that also. Chada the shofar echad amar chmana v'lo shayim b'shlosh shofars. The real thing is it can't be 2 or 3, and this looks like 2 or 3. Oh, and the other thing, igneshu karen. Rabbi Yosi will say back to you. The kamar shofar echad amar chmana v'lo shayim b'shlosh shofros. Kivan the mechabri ahadadi. Since it's all connected, it's not really two different things. Chadu, it's one. But the kamar igneshu karen. The other thing, it's a horn. Kol shofars not mitu karen. Okay, they're all called horn. Now. It's as I said, fascinating that the Gemara, can't relate to the power of the point of the rabbis and is making up new arguments. Okay, and clearly, right, there's some. So they can't understand exactly the significance of do you find that it's called a Karen or not find that it's called a Karen and so on. So what's really going on here? So Ramban, you should be aware, and this will be relevant for the rest of the Masechet. Ramban is a famous drush of Rosh Hashanah, which it's really like. I can tell you, I unless you were a Talmud Chacham, I pity the people that had to be in the show when he gave his drush of Rosh Hashanah, because basically it's his commentary to Masechet Rosh Hashanah from this point on, basically topic by topic, where not like line by line, but he basically and discusses every single topic that arises within the issues of Hilchos Shofar and Hilchos, Tefillah and Rosh Hashanah, and goes through everything. It's a great parish on Masechus Rosh Hashanah. I don't know exactly about giving it in show for your drasha. At the very end of what must be 100 pages, he has one paragraph that's Musar. Okay, his basic it's good Musar. His basic Musar is he says, look, if you didn't have the opportunity to do tshuva, you would sin once, and then you'd be punished for your sin. Now that God's given you the opportunity to do tshuva, every minute you're not doing tshuva, you're essentially repeating your sin. So you better do tshuva. That was his musar. The rest of the time was spent in 100 pages of a commentary on topics of Rosh Hashanah. So one of the first things he deals with is this issue about Karen. And he says, what's going on here? Ikri Karen, not Ikri Karen. And he says, if you look at the Mishnah doesn't say the problem with a para is that it is called a Karen. The Mishnah says the problem with a para is mitnei shehu Karen. And the Ramban says that what is the real difference? A cow's horn doesn't have marrow. It's all bone. You have to carve out the bone to make it into a horn. Whereas a ram's horn has marrow, and you just essentially scoop out the marrow. And therefore, he says, a cow's horn, to be a musical instrument, is essentially manufactured, right? As opposed to a other animal where you scoop out the marrow, that's essentially a natural shofar. So he says the difference isn't what it's called. The difference is that a type of a thing that you have to basically create as a manufactured musical instrument, which is what Karen means, that's invalid because it is essentially different than something that is naturally can be used as a shofar. So now how that fits into the Gemara, why does the Gemara bother with the psukim? So he tries to make it fit into the Gemara. But putting the Gemara aside, it's a great shot in the Mishnah. The Mishnah says mitnei shehu Karen, not mitnei shenikra Karen. Okay, and by the way, somebody said to him afterwards, this is just so wonderful because it's just so real to life. Somebody said to him, "Oh, Tosfos already said that chiddush." He says, "What do you mean Tosfos said that chiddush?" So if you look at Tosfos, right, it says so Tosfos says chutz mishel para. Tosfos says hadulok tani nami chutz mishel re'ein. To shel re'im nami ikri Karen, d'chsiv v'karnei re'im parnav, d'chsiv v'karnei re'im anitani. Why didn't it also exclude their aim? So it says, v'shema einam chalulim, maybe they're not naturally hollow, v'einam ru'uyim l'shofar, and they're not fit for being a shofar. So you see, Tosfos says, because it's not naturally hollow, it can't be a shofar. So the Ramban says, first of all, if Tosfos said it, then wonderful! And I was mechavein to Tosfos, and that's wonderful. But by the way, Tosfos isn't saying it. Tosfos says that we didn't bother excluding them because they're not usually used. They're not usually used for a shofar. He didn't say that's the reason that it's being invalidated. The Mishnah says the reason it's invalidated is for that reason. Tosfos is just saying it wasn't relevant to discuss another case because those things are not used. So anyway, Tosfos though does recognize the difference of the physical difference between a cow's horn and another type of a horn. But the Ramban says that's actually what the Mishnah means. Who Karen, not mitnei shenikra Karen. You had a question? No? Okay, Jonathan. All right, fine. So now the Gemara, back to the Gemara. So the Gemara says, my mashma, 3 lines down in the middle-sized lines. My mashma dahai yuvla. The high yuval lishna dichrahu. What makes you? Where do you get the idea that yovel means a ram's horn? Because that's been our assumption, and whether it's called shofar, called Karen, but we understand it means a ram's horn. The time we talk about brisa. I'm Rabbi Akiva. Kashilachli la'arvaya. When I went to Arabia, how you calling the dichra yuvla? They would call a ram a yovel, and that's important. Now we understand that when the Torah says yovel, it means a ram's horn. Now we're going to get into a little passage about how you can learn sometimes difficult words from the vernacular. It's sort of like scholars, right? If they're trying to reconstruct what words meant, ancient Semitic languages, they'll also look at, how certain words are used in the vernacular today in Arabic and so on, and try, so how the people are using the words can often be a good evidence in terms of what those words originally meant. So now we're going to actually have some examples of that. The Amar Rabbi Akiva, so Rabbi Akiva said, Shalachti leGalia, when I went to, where is that? Not the Galilee. Galicia? No, maybe it means, what do you call it? What was French? Gaul. I was thinking Gaul. When I went to Gaul, how you call the Nida Galmuda? They call the Nida Galmuda. My Galmuda, what does Galmuda mean? Gmula da mi ba'ala. This woman is separated off, weaned away from her husband. Okay, the Gemara doesn't say what difference that makes. Tosfos says that it helps explain a pasuk. Okay, the Amar Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva says, "Kishalati la'Afriki." When I went to Africa, it's fascinating that Rabbi Akiva went on all these trips. Yeah. Okay, how you calling l'ma'ah kesita? They called the ma'ah, a certain coin, a kesita. L'may nafkamina. Why do I care? Lifrushe mea kasita. To explain the verse of mea kasita. I know it's doraita mea danki. That's in the Torah. What does it mean? It means 100 donkey, which is 100 ma'ah. I know what unit of coin we're talking about. I'm a Rebbe. Now we'll go talk about Rebbe. When I went to the islands, kira. They would call selling kira. What difference does it make? Lifrushe, to explain the verse, Asher kariti li, that I was koreh for me, which now we're going to say means I purchased for me. I'm Reb Shimon Lakish. Now we're moving from Tanaim to Amarayim. Keshalachli l'tchum kan nesharia, wherever that is. Hayukari l'kala ginfi. They called a bride ginfi. Uletarnagol, and they called a rooster sichvi. L'kala ninfi mikra. What's the verse? Hifei nof misof kol haaretz. So the glory, the beautiful foliage, not foliage, whatever. Anyway, what do you call that thing of the tree? I guess the foliage, but the whole crown. Anyway, whatever it is. How do they translate nof? A nof. What's a nof?
Beautiful view.
View. Oh, nof. Okay, beautiful view. View, the joy of the whole land. So nof and ninfi, kala is beautiful, so that's kala.
Ninfi is Greek, according to this.
Meaning what?
Bride.
Bride. Interesting. Ninfi?
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. Would that be anything at all like neophyte? Ninfi? Probably not. Probably not. Okay. Uletarna goes sichvi. Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Rav, Yibai Seimer Reb Yeshua ben Lakish, Mikra, what's the verse? Mi shas betuchot chachma, o minatan lasechvi vina. Who places in the tuchot, which are here read as the kidneys, wisdom, and who gives to the sechvi understanding? Mi shas betuchot chachma, elu klayot. Those are the kidneys, which were understood in the ancient world to be where wisdom and understanding came from. Oh, minatan, and if that sounds weird, the heart is not the seat of emotion. The heart is just a pump of blood, but we associate the heart with emotion. So what organs of the body metaphorically are associated with, does not necessarily make sense. So, okay, kidneys is where your wisdom comes from. Oh, maybe you're right. Maybe that is why it's connected. Okay. So that's the rooster that knows when to crow in the morning. Okay. Levi iklalahu asrak. Levi came to a place. Asa gavel kamei and amalei, and wherever the place is, doesn't matter. And a person came and said to him, kavan ploni. I was koveya a certain person. So I was koveya Joe Schmo. Lord the other night, he didn't know what this guy was talking about. So also show baby Russia. So he went to the study hall. He says, "I'll ask my colleagues. They'll tell me what this means." I don't normally talk to the common people here. I don't know what that word means. It's some vernacular. So anyway, Amruleh, they said to him, "Gazlan Amrlecha." He said, "I stole from somebody." T'chsiv, as the verse says, "Hayikva dam Elohim." When a person steal from God, right? And then is gamek va'anucha hamaser v'hatruma. That you stole from me by not giving the ma'aser. So kavan means to steal, which is interesting. It's based on a pasuk. It's not just Stammer vernacular. Why did he not know it? Anyway, Amalei Rava mi Barnish l'Ravashi. So Rava from Barnish said to Ravashi, "Yihavi hasam." If that had happened to me, if somebody said this word and I didn't know what he was talking about, havi aminalei, I would have said to him. Back to the guy who said this to me. I was koveya so-and-so. I would have said to him, Heichi kavacha, how did you koveya him? V'mai kavacha, with what were you koveya him? V'mai kavacha, why were you koveya him? U'mimela, have a yadina. But based on his answer, I would have figured it out. By context, very smart. It's like me. I always forget people's names. So I just start talking to them, and I hope that eventually I'm going to remember who they are and put them into some type of a context. Oh, right, you're my cousin. No, okay. All right, anyway, so I would have just started asking him questions, and eventually I would have figured it out. The EU Savar, and he held, no, he was actually telling him something of Isser. Now, he did tell him something of Isser, stole, but the Gemara means even something more unsavory, and he did not want to enter into a conversation about finding out the details of this unsavory thing. So he just wanted to end the conversation. Okay, now, Lo Yadi Rabbanan, the rabbis here, Rabbanan means the rabbinic students, didn't know my Seirugin, what the word Seirugin meant, which appears in a Mishnah, which is pretty funny because it's a pretty common word in Mishnaic Hebrew. So Shamu ala Amsa de Rabbi. So now, basing on just the vernacular, they heard the maidservant in Rebbe's house. The Chazisnehu Rabbanan Tavu Ayo Piski Piski. She would see the rabbis, the students coming in like groups and groups, not all at one time. And Amrlu, and she said to them, Ad matayatem nichnasim serugim serugim. How long are you going to be coming in? Serugim serugim. So they figured out it meant not to do something continuously, but to do it break it up in increments. Okay, so Lavi Yadi Rabbanan, the rabbis didn't know my chalug logot. What are chalug logot? Which are a certain type of vegetable, which are relevant for certain issues about a zav and knowing whether he ate them and so on, and how to attribute the flow. So Yom Echad Shamuel Amsa de Rabbi. One day they saw the maidservant in Rabbi's house. The Chazis lahu gavar to come evader parpachine. That he saw a certain person that was scattering his parpachine, which is
it's the purslane plant.
Purslane. There you go. Amalei, she said to him, okay, so now they figured out what it was. This is just like me, this is why I'm always asking Charlie, they're like, okay, so what does Steinsaltz say? Like,
Yeah.
how do I know what these words mean?
Say that.
Particularly, words that describe like nouns, that describe there's like an infinite amount, not infinite, but obviously, in terms of the different objects that we deal with in the day that normally don't come up in like rabbinic discussion, right? I mean, if you just think of all the different words we've got to describe all these different objects. So whenever the Gemara starts talking about like realia and uses particular words, I have no idea what it's talking about. How frequently do you encounter those words in legal texts? So here they are; they're figuring it out based on how the actual vernacular and how it's used. Okay, Lo Yadi Rabbanan. The rabbis didn't know what it meant. Salsala utero memecha. You will be misalsel it, understood to be the Torah, and it will raise you up. So what's salsala? Yom Echad Shamuel Amsa de Rabbi. Once they saw the maidservant of Rabbi's house, they heard the maidservant of Rabbi's house. The Havas Amar Lahu Gavra. She would say to that man, the Havikam Hafech Besari, that was always like playing with his hair, and fiddling with his hair, and how beautiful his hair was,
That's
and
the
so
Rashi
on.
Yosef.
Right, the Rashi by Yosef. Amarle Amatayatam Salsel B'Zarecha. How long are you going to be, playing with your hair?
First of all, this maidservant must have had a doctorate in etymology.
No, I think the
Brilliant.
problem. I think the problem more is that she just is closer to the to the people. I mean, and she's using the vernacular, but also
she used a pure ancient form of the Hebrew language.
pure ancient form. So is that like what they taught them in Rebbe's house? I guess that makes sense, because I've been saying it's a vernacular, but the vernacular would have been Palestinian Aramaic,
Right.
and these words are Hebrew words. So that's actually a good point. So why was the maidservant? Anyway, look, I mean, maybe she was a very proper woman because she was always trying to whip the rabbis in line. She was the Miss Manners of the rabbis.
Is her name ever given?
I don't think so. So anyway, so she was the one that, you're right, maybe had this more, this more ancient, pure language that she was connected to. Okay. Lo Yadi Rabbanan. I will be mitateit with the mitatei of destruction. So that's pretty clear, or somewhat clear.
Mm-hmm. So
Yom Echad Shamuel Amsa de Rabbi, that was Amos Chaverta. One day they heard the maidservant of Rabbi say to her friend, Shekuli ta'atisa v'tati besa. Go grab your tati, whatever, your mitatei, and be mitatei your house. So clearly it meant a broom. Okay, that's even in Hebrew, right?
Yes.
Isn't a broom a
Yes.
mitatei?
Yes.
Okay. So Lo Yadi Rabbanan, the rabbis didn't know. My Hashleichal Hashem Yahavecha. Cast unto God your burden. V'hu yichal kolecha, and God will sustain you. So they didn't know what the word Yahavecha meant. So Amar Rabbi Bar Chana Yom Echad Havi Azlina Bahade Hahu Taya. One day I was going with a certain nomad, normally translated as Arab, Havi Darina Tuna, and I was carrying a load. V'Amarli, and he said to me, Shko Yavecha v'Shadi Agmalai. Take your load and throw it on my camel. So you see, Yahav means your load. Okay, I heard a beautiful. What do you call it? Story of the Dubner Magid by this of Hashlech Hashem Yahavecha. He says, what does it mean? He says that, cast your burden to God. So he says, let me tell you, let me tell you a mashal. So here's the mashal. I'll tell you the story. So this guy's going on the road and he's carrying his really heavy burden, and and a wagon comes by, and the wagon driver says to him, get on my wagon, I'll give you a ride into town. So he gets onto the wagon and he's still carrying his load on his back. So the wagon driver looks at him and he says, "What are you doing? Put your load down. Put it in the cart. You're sitting in the cart. Why are you sitting with the load on the back? Take the load off, put it in the cart." He says, "Dear Mr. Wagon Driver, you're already doing me such a kindness to carry me, to carry me into town. How could I ask you also to carry my load?" So, so he says, "This is what we do. God supports the whole world, sustains the whole world, and we feel we still have to carry our load. And God, how could I ask you to carry my load?" He says, "He's already sustaining you, so just give your load over to God." I thought, very beautiful little mashal. Yes.
It's interesting we have Tanaim and Amoraim using what would to be called academic methodology.
Right, looking at, exploring how it's commonly used. Right. Okay, let's now go to the next Mishnah. Shofar, Shel Rosh Hashanah, Shel Ya'el Pashut. And the shofar of Rosh Hashanah is of a Ya'el, which is a mountain goat, right?
An ibex.
Ibex. Okay.
Ibex.
What's an ibex exactly?
There's a picture. It's
like a goat with big horns. That
Yeah.
go
Okay. Yeah, so it's somewhat like a mountain goat,
Yeah,
right?
it's a form. It's a
Okay, fine.
it's a goat.
Okay. Also a good Scrabble word. Okay. So they're straight, meaning it's not twisted. It's got a curve, but it's not totally like twisted. Okay. Upiv mitzupeh zahav, and its mouth would be plated in gold. Now this is only in the Beis Hamikdash. We're going to see that we're describing what it would be in the Beis Hamikdash. V'shtei chatzatzrot min hatzadim. And again, clearly, we're not talking about your normal blowing of the shofar. There would be two trumpets on the side on Rosh Hashanah when they blow the shofar in the Beis Hamikdash.
So much for the gold, by the way.
Exactly. So much for not using the gold.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Good. Excellent point. Okay. Shofar ma'arich v'chatzotzot mekatzrot. So they would all be playing, but the chatzotzot would go shorter, and the shofar sound would continue longer. So you hear the shofar sound by itself, and also it emphasizes what's the focus. Shemitzvah hayom b'shofar. The mitzvah of the day is the shofar. The chatzotzot are only an accompaniment. Ubetaniyot. Now on fast days, because on fast days they would do a Shemona Esrei with 24 brachot. They would add 6 brachot unique to the fast day, and when they would say those 6 brachot in the repetition of the Shemona Esrei, at the end of each bracha, they would blow the shofrot and chatzotzrot, and they would say Hariu b'nei Aaron Hariu, Tiku b'nei Aaron Tiku, and then the Kohanim, at least in the Beis Hamikdash, would blow the shofrot, blow the chatzotzrot at the end of each of these additional brachot that they made in Shemona Esrei on the fast days. So, and that time when they did that both in the Beis Hamikdash, by the way, blowing the shofar and chatzotzrot, and even outside the Beis Hamikdash, they would blow shofar and chatzotzrot on fast days all over. So that is an interesting thing to think about, of the integration of the blowing of a shofar with Shemona Esrei, with a day that's particularly about reaching out to God in prayer. How we take that model by Rosh Hashanah and we basically employ that, the idea of using it. Now you could say it's not a Rosh Hashanah model; it's the Psukim, right? The Psukim says, it says, what it says, Ki tavo milchama b'artechem al atzar hatzorer atchem b'hareyotem b'chatzotzrot. Right? You blow the chatzotzrot as a way of calling out to God. So that's already, and that's, and you do it on the korbanot, and then tefillah replaces korbanot. So the whole idea of the chatzotzrot as calling out to God is something that played a central role in the tefillot of Ta'anit, and there the emphasis was chatzotzrot, because that's the psukim in the Torah. But it's an important parallel with Rosh Hashanah.
It's a Ta'anit for rain.
For rain, a Ta'anit for rain, right? Not our historical Taniyot.
Right.
These are the Ta'anit for rain. Okay? U'b'Taniyot, b'shel zecharim kifufim. Now the shofars they would use would be ram's horns, which would be twisted, like the whole big, fancy, long, twisted horns. U'pihen mitzupeh kesef. And it would be covered with silver, the mouth. The shtei chatzotzrot be'emsa, and the trumpets would be in the middle, right? And presumably, the shofar mekatzer v'chatzotzrot ma'arichot. The shofar would be shorter, and the chatzotzrot would go longer. So there, the chatzotzrot are the focus. They're in the center. They go longer, and the shofar is just the accompaniment. Shemitzvah hayom b'chatzotzrot on a ta'anit, the mitzvah would be a chatzotzrot. That would be in the Beis Hamikdash. Out of the Beis Hamikdash, they would still do blowings, but they would not be in the middle and on the sides and covered with silver. This whole thing about this whole collection of instruments was only in the Beis Hamikdash. Okay. Now, relatedly, Shavah Yovel Rosh Hashanah, Yovel, the Jubilee year, where you also blow a shofar, is similar to Rosh Hashanah l'tkiyah u'lebrachot, for the tkiyot and for the brachot, like, how many tkiyot you do, and the various brachot, like, Malchias, Yichronos, and Shofros. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Rosh Hashanah, Tokim b'shel Zacharim, u'b'yovlo b'shel Ye'elim. There is a difference in terms of the nature of the horn that you use. On Rosh Hashanah, you use rams. So notice he's already arguing on the first part of the Mishnah that says you use Ya'el. Here he says you use a ram's horn on Rosh Hashanah. Ubiyovlot b'shel Ye'elim, and it's on the Yovel that you use the ibex horn. So Rabbi Yehuda basically argues: A, Yovel and Rosh Hashanah are not the same for the type of horn, and B, he argues what horn they would use on Rosh Hashanah.
Zacharim is
rams. Yeah, Zacharim is rams. Yes. So let's take a look at the Gemara. Our Rabbi Levi. Mitzvah shel Rosh Hashanah v'shel Yom Kippurim b'kfufim. Okay, v'shel Kol Hashanah b'pshutim. On Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur you use bent horns, right? And the rest of the year you use, meaning on Taniyot, use straight horns. So this is getting a little confusing. Who says what? Okay, so here you have Rosh Hashanah, Yovel, and Ta'anit. Okay, three times. Okay, Tanakama said Rosh Hashanah was Ya'el, Pashut. Okay, Ya'el is always Pashut. Okay, Yovel presumably the same, and Taniyot was Ayal or Zacharim, and therefore Kifufim. Okay, that's Tanakama. Rabbi Yehuda, says that here you would do Ayal, you would do Kafuf, you would do that, and on Yovel you would do Ya'el. So number one is he doesn't have it as the same. He has a difference between Rosh Hashanah and Ya'el. And number two, he has Rosh Hashanah itself being different. And now in the Gemara, we have Levi. It's Levi, right?
Right.
Who says Rosh Hashanah would be Ayal, or Zacharim, if you want the language in the Gemara, which is Kafuf. And on Yovel, it would be Ayal Kfufim. And only on Ta'anit would it be Ya'el and therefore Pashut. So you can figure out the other possible configurations, but you see all the differences here, right? He's like Rabbi Yehuda that he's got it bent, but he's not like Rabbi Yehuda because he's got the same thing for Rosh Hashanah and Yovel, okay? But he's also not like Tanakama. Tanakama has Ya'el for both. He's got the Ayal, he's got Zacharim for both, okay? And he's also not like anybody in terms of the Ta'anit. Here you've got Kfufim. Rabbi Yehuda didn't have a say about the Kfufim, right? And he says it's Pashut. So everybody's all over the map, okay, in terms of what it is. So the Gemara is going to try to make some sense of at least what might be informing these different opinions. Let's take a look. So the Gemara says like this. So the Gemara says, "V'atna and Rosh Hashanah shel Ya'el Pashut." Doesn't the Mishnah say it's straight on Rosh Hashanah? How could he say it's bent on Rosh Hashanah? So Huda Amar. So he says, wait a minute. Huda Amar ki Tana. To Tana, he says like the following Tana, like Rabbi Yehuda. Because Rabbi Yehuda already in the Mishnah says Zacharim, and Zacharim presumably mean Kifufim. So Huda Amar ki Tana, to Tana, Tana Price. Rabbi Yehuda, Rosh Hashanah, you're talking B'shel Zacharim, Kifufim. Ubiyovlot, B'shel Ye'elim. So it's essentially the Mishnah. The only reason they quoted the Breita was because in the Breita it's explicit that Zacharim means Kifufim. Okay, so he's at least like Rabbi Yehuda that he uses Kafuf on Rosh Hashanah. Mm-hmm. They disagree about Yovel, but at least he has Rabbi Yehuda of Kafuf on Rosh Hashanah. Okay, so the Gemara says like this. Just tell me we rule like Rabbi Yehuda. No. Had he said that, you would have thought he agrees with Rabbi Yehuda that Yovel also is a what do you call it? Is a twisted horn. Is a straight horn. Rabbi Yehuda says that Yovel is a straight horn. You would have thought he agrees with Rabbi Yehuda there. So so wait a minute. Kamash Malon, that he doesn't. He agrees that it's twisted, but as opposed to Rabbi Yehuda that makes a difference between Rosh Hashanah and Yovel, he keeps with the idea that Rosh Hashanah and Yovel are the same. Okay, so basically, there's two issues here. One issue is that do you basically feel that Rosh Hashanah and Yovel have to be the same? Okay, where Levi and Tanakama feel that, and Rabbi Yehuda does not. Rabbi Yehuda is willing to deal with each thing separately. By the way, I want to say an interesting point. If we had more time, we'd look inside in the Mishnah in Ta'anit that discusses the blowing of the shofar on Taniyot, or the Chatzotzot, as we spoke about. And there, when it speaks about the brachot that you make, the 6 extra brachot you make in the Shemona Esrei, the Tanna Kama says, you know what 2 of those 6 brachot are? Zichronot and Shofrot. Not Malchios, because Malchios isn't relevant, but at least Zichronot and Shofrot. And Rabbi Yehuda in the Mishnah says, you don't do Zichronos and Shofros on Tanis. So Rabbi Yehuda doesn't have this idea of just like, let's just equate things one another. Everything is distinct. Everything has its distinct character. So one issue here is that is Rosh Hashanah like Yovel or not? Okay, Tanakama and Levi says yes, and Rabbi Yehuda says no. The other issue is about whether, it'd be nice if I had another color, but is whether you're using Pashut or Kafut. Okay, it's all right. Tanakama says Pashut, and Rabbi Yehuda here says, we'll do it like that, kafuf. Okay? So, so Levi is having like a split sock. I like Rabbi Yehuda's idea of kafuf, but I don't like his idea of Yovel being different from Rosh Hashanah. Yovel is the same from Rosh Hashanah, so they're both going to be kifufim.
And visually now, it's very easy to read.
I know, I thought so. Thank you. So, but it's okay, you've got the colors and the twisty things. It's all right. Let's just finish up, at least this part, the end of the daf. So the Gemara says like this. B'mai kamiflagi, what's the debate about? I'm sorry. I said, right. What's the debate about? Now, forget Levi for a minute. What's the debate in the Mishnah about whether on Rosh Hashanah you want a straight one or you want a twisted one? So the Gemara says like this. B'mai kamiflagi, when I lost my place again. Mar savra b'Rosh Hashanah kamet kayif inish daite tfei ma'ali. So now it's very important. Now we're turning to the questions of symbolism and an approach towards Rosh Hashanah. One holds on Rosh Hashanah, your das, your intent, your focus should be straight. You're thinking about just going straight to God, bringing your prayers straight to God. You want something straight to symbolize that. I'm sorry, did I get that wrong? Yeah, I was going to get to the next opinion. Excuse me. The more your das is bent over, meaning it should be about, more like supplication or more like a sense of like being down on yourself, focusing on all the tshuva that you have to do, feeling your sense of shame. There's a sense of being sort of bent over, supplicating, negating yourself. That's an approach to Rosh Hashanah. Yom Kippur, it's more going straight. Now, what does that mean, going straight? So Rashi says, because on Yom Kippur, on Yovel, it's about announcing freedom, right? So announce freedom. You don't have a sense of twisted. You want to sort of, you want to burst it forth, and it's straight, and it's direct, in a straight line, and it's just making that announcement, getting it out there. Okay, so that's the idea of here it's bent, and here it's straight. He doesn't buy in that it has to be the same, and there's a logic for it to be different. You want the announcement to go straight out. You want yourself to be bent over. That's Reb Yehuda. And what does the Tanna Kama hold? Umar Sarva, the Tanna Kama hold, Rosh Hashanah come to Pashini Nishtaite Tfei Mali. No, in Rosh Hashanah you should be like going straight to God. Don't focus on beating yourself up and on self-abnegation and prostration. No, focus on getting close to God. Ubetaniyot, there's a difference. Like, is it about guilt and sin, or is it about drawing close? Ubetaniyot come to Kaif Nishtaite Tfei Mali. So bracketing here the question about Yovel, right? On Tanis, at least, here on Tanis, that's when you're going to want to be bent over. Tanis, it's about, we're terrible, we sinned, ashes on the head, so that's about focusing on the sin. Rosh Hashanah, interesting, is not so much about focusing on sin and negation, and you're terrible, but it's focusing on getting close to God. Very different way of thinking about Rosh Hashanah. Before we end, I want to say another thing that connects to this that the Gemara is ignoring, because the Gemara is focusing on twisted versus straight, but also twisted is a ram, and a ram is about like the Akedah. So the Akedah also, what's the Akedah imagery? It's about self-sacrifice. Mm-hmm. It's about sort of frustration, giving yourself up. It's a different type of an imagery as opposed to like if you think about the proud mountain goat there, whatever. So even the animals used are very different and evoke that imagery in a different way. And one final important point is it ties into an issue we've raised before of is the shofar directed to you or is the shofar directed to God? If you think about the shofar as a call to do tshuva, that is very much the bent over, and you hear it, and you're fearful, and and you're reflective. that's the shofar. This Rashi, if you read Rashi closely, Rashi is saying this. That's the shofar that you're hearing. But if you think of the shofar as part of our prayers and as the way of bringing our prayers to God, so bringing your prayers to God is not a twisted direction. Bringing your prayers to God is like the straight line to God. So there's a lot of very interesting things in the symbolisms here, how the symbolisms match the shape, match the animal, and also what those say about whether shofar is directed to you or is it directed to God. Tosfos has a long discussion about how do we paskin. And Tosfos actually says, presumably this is only lichatchila. It's only a symbolic question. It's not a real halachic issue. But Tosfos at the end says, no, maybe it's actually halach l'masa, and it's me'akev. And if you don't have the right one, you're really not yotzei. Okay, which is like hard to believe. We certainly don't pass it that way, because as Tosfos says, the first Mishnah says, everything is kosher for a shofar. So the general assumption here is this is just a symbolic lichatchila question, but nevertheless a real important thing at the heart of how do we think about what shofar is all about. And with that, we will end for today.
Rosh Hashanah.
Chag Sameach.
You'll be back.